Ag PhD full episodes and more are now available on Acres TV, the newest ag platform connecting you to fields of information. Look for us on watchacrestv.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little about drying corn on the farm. Or I guess drying corn anywhere, wherever you choose to do it.
One thing, Brian, this year that did dry out a lot of corn was drought and an excessive amount of heat throughout the summer. Man, it pushed corn along fast, and fortunately this year is one that a lot of farmers would say, we had some pretty good dry down out in the field.
Okay, there's a difference between dry down and premature death. And quite frankly, when you say drought is lack of rain. That's one side of it, and that leads to premature death in a lot of cases. The flip side is we had excessive heat early in the season. We got way ahead on growing degree units, and corn matures based on heat or growing degree units, so we were ahead in that respect as well. So yeah, that's the reason why harvest is just unbelievably early this year. We've only had 2 times ever where we've harvested corn before beans on our farm, 2012 and this year.
Well, here's the other thing too. One thing that you have to be careful about when you look at cornfields, if they are green and you say, oh, there's lots of green leaves, it's probably not even close to harvest. That's not right. That doesn't necessarily mean the grain is not dry and the ears are not dry. So for farmers, they'll be doing a lot of checking leading up to corn harvest and all the way through corn harvest. They'll pull some ears, test the grain, and see what kind of moisture percentage is in the grain. They will ideally like to see that moisture percentage lower because they want to store the grain or they want to sell the grain. And it does kind of make a difference what you're doing with that grain as to what moisture percentage you'd like to see.
Well, this is Farm Basics, and so we especially want to speak to non-farmers just so you can kind of understand some of the work we have to go through as farmers to get this corn delivered to a grain elevator somewhere, because the grain elevator wants it at 15 or maybe 15.5% moisture. If we haul them something that's 17 or 20% or 23%, then they charge a pretty high fee for that. So a lot of times we as farmers want the grain to either dry in the field, like Darren said, or we're going to somehow dry it on the farm. And what we do in our operation at our bin site is we're either going to use continuous flow dryers. So we'll put heat to the grain. There will be a bunch of heat that goes to it, anywhere from 160 degrees to 210 degrees. And then after that, we'll cool that grain down. But then the other way to do this is just by simply running a fan on that grain when the daytime humidity is very dry. Could be nighttime too, but it's usually the daytime humidity being real low. You pump some of that dry air in, and you can lower that moisture pretty slowly over time.
Well, as farmers put grain into bins, it eventually needs to get down and be pretty dry. Otherwise, you could see some spoilage in bins. You'll see more insects. You'll see more fungal type diseases, those types of things, if you have wet grain and lots of moisture in the bin. To store grain safely, we'd really like to see that grain down at 13% or less if we possibly could.
All right, so this drying grain process, and especially drying corn, it can be very extensive, it can be very expensive, it can take time. And I guess that's the reason why we wanted to communicate this today. I ran our dryers myself for 20 years on our farm, and I can just tell you it's a lot more fun when the day is very nice. Let's say it's a 70-degree day out as opposed to a 40-degree day. It takes a lot less heat for me to have to run that grain dryer. It takes a lot less effort to get that grain dried down, but drying grain is something very important on just about every farm.
Well, one other thing that is critically important if you're trying to raise a crop is controlling weeds like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?